Okay, let us begin because there's a lot to cover. Because anytime you have Shabbos, Hilchos Shavuos is a very broad area, obviously, and Hilchos Yom Tov, since Yom Tov comes around only from time to time, there are many details about Hilchos Yom Tov that need to be spoken about and reviewed. And then when you have Yom Tov Friday and Shabbos, like Shavuos is this year, you have then Erev Tavshilin. So that's always, when you have something like this, there's already so much to talk about. It's almost l'mayla. In the meantime, since we have various measures that we have to adhere to because of the health situation, so that makes everything a lot more complicated. And since a lot of it is uncharted territory, even for Rabbanim, things that have never really been asked, and as a result of this, it's not 100% clear, then there's disagreement among Rabbanei Chabad about the best way to approach many of the shilas. So we'll get to as many of the questions as we can. So those of you that emailed in questions, so we'll try to cover all of them there. And I sort of doubt there'll be time at the end, but if there is, you can put on the chat questions. And if there's necessity in after Yom Tov, then we could perhaps have another session. Just in terms of, I just give you an example of questions that nobody would think of, but that became relevant now as far as the Zman. Normally, we don't rely, when it comes to kashrus, on reading a label for ingredients. You need a siman kashrus, you need a hechsher to know, but sometimes that you want to know perhaps something was mislabeled and you're checking for a dairy ingredient or something like this. So it's helpful to look at the list of ingredients. Well, the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration in the United States, gave out guidelines recently that as a result of the whole virus crisis, that companies do not need to adhere to normal labeling regulations. So the assumption that Dinah de Malchusa requires labeling on food to be accurate without anything extra, without anything missing, no longer applies as a temporary basis. It's too difficult for them to meet their supply needs and still stay in business. So whatever you are relying on the label, except for a siman kashrus, you cannot. So too, if you have a product that you know is kosher normally, and you know it's been kosher like this for years, and you don't bother checking for a siman kashrus to make sure it has the hechsher on it, now you have to be especially careful to do that, because there are many places that are just not possible to supervise now. Mashgichim cannot be sent there, and the places have, for whatever reason, gone not kosher, at least for a certain period of time. I just mentioned something which is really also, it's completely unrelated, that people don't normally think about these things, but the Alter Rebbe says in Hilchos Shavuos, he brings Yerushalmi, that when it's a windy day, you're not allowed to spit outside. Because the Indian from Zeta, normally Zeta, we learned according to the Bavli, it's using the wind to separate two different things. So if a person spits in the wind, then the wind blows the saliva apart, so you're not separating, it's all one thing. So what kind of beta is it? What kind of Zeta is it? But the Yerushalmi says it's prohibited, and Alter Rebbe brings that down. So when you're davening outside and you get to Aleinu and it's a windy day, so obviously then you don't spit by Aleinu. I mean, just small things, but things which are never really brought El Aladas. One thing which is before each Yom Tov, that the Rebbe stressed that the idea of Simchas Yom Tov is mitzvah esem min haTorah, and that's for the men. It says ein simcha ela basar, ein simcha ela b'yayin. So today that applies primarily to wine. That mitzvah in deraisa each day of Yom Tov to have a revius of wine. Basar is not a mitzvah deraisa anymore because there's no karbonis. The meat referred to is that of the karbonis, but nevertheless it's a mitzvah to eat meat on Yom Tov, although it's not a mitzvah deraisa. And then for everyone else, it's appropriate. For women, it's buying them begodim, tachshitim, for children, things that they enjoy, and so on. But it says that that part of Simchas Yom Tov, if people just make the meal for themselves and they don't invite poor people and have guests at their table, then we don't call it, the Alter Rebbe brings down, you don't call it Simchas Yom Tov, we call it Simchas Krise. It's a simcha of your stomach that you're having a big meal. What kind of simcha is that? You have to share it with people less fortunate than yourselves. However, today, obviously, because it is a situation, it's against it's against the law to do that. So it's more important than ever. The Rebbe always stressed before Yom Tov the idea of providing tzorchei chag. So we have the inyan of Moschitim before Pesach, the Rebbe brought out that so too for other Yomim Tevim. And although Shavuos is much shorter, okay, you should buy a cheesecake, but it's much shorter. It's a 2-day Yom Tov. But many people, as a result of the ability to acquire proper income as a result of the situation, are in more dire financial straits. So one should be, and you don't see the gabayim that are going around collecting either. So it's more important to make that effort and to reach out, especially the meisters that reach out to our community, the Bene Kaplan Fund. Things can be brought to the Morozovs or the Rabbi Gerlitzky's fund. That things could be brought or emailed to Ari Dworkin. And just to mention Mada, all of the institutions of tzedakah. So although it's, I think first we'll speak about minyonim b'chlal, that even though it's not only relevant for Shavuos, it's relevant all the time, but there are a number of areas which are matter of misunderstanding and dispute. So I'll try to clarify things as best as I can. So the idea that of the Porch minyonim now, I'll have to give one other introduction, and that is I'm not a policeman and I'm not a doctor, and I don't really plan on being either one. So b'meila, exactly the interpretation of the various statutes, I'm not an expert at that. And in terms of what's safe and what's not safe, for anything that I say, I am taking as a base the rules of public health department. So when it comes to isurim like taras mishpacha, so then we ask our own doctors and see what's safe, what's not safe. But when it comes to everything else, minyonim, the enes rachmana patre. So when it was impossible to make minyonim, so nobody was aver, nobody transgressed anything. There's a famous story of the Reb Zusha Rebbe Elimelech when they were in prison, and they couldn't daven, and they were terribly troubled because they had a pail. There was no toilet, no way to get rid of human waste with the other people in the cell. So there was one big pail in the middle, so you weren't allowed to daven there. So the whole time they couldn't get out of the jail cell, and they couldn't daven because of the waste that was there. So they were having tzar rav, and then suddenly the Zusha realized, he says, but Hashem, who recreates the world every moment, created the world exactly in this situation. So right now, since the Shulchan Aruch says that we're not allowed to daven in such a room, so therefore we're serving Hashem through not davening. And right now, it's the Ratzon HaBeida, that it's Hashem's will, that right now we shouldn't be davening. He started dancing. And meanwhile, he's dancing. So then the Rabbi Melech danced with him also. Meanwhile, all of the Nachrim in the cell, they see there's a simcha, somebody lifting up the spirits, so they're all dancing. The guards come and say, what's going on over there? So I don't know, something about this pail. He says, the pail's making them dance, so we'll take it out. So he took it out they got rid of the pail, and then they were able to take a daven. So in the cases where we're not able, because of various restrictions, whether it's legal restrictions, medical restrictions, public restrictions, or private, that if the Torah says it's a enes, so then if it's something permitted, then you can do it. If it's something which is not permitted, there's a famous lashon that's brought. It's mitzvah ba me aveda, and yeshem kula aveda. So if you have somebody, the Peshaila is brought in Poskim, that if somebody, the doctor said he's not allowed to eat matzah, and it's dangerous for him, and it's prohibited for him to eat matzah, and he didn't listen to the doctors, and he ate matzah. And what happened? So it happened like it says in Zayah, Meichel das Vas, and it healed him. And now he's better, and the doctor says he's okay to eat matzah. Okay, so there are many poskim that say he's got to eat matzah again because the first time he's not yetzer. That since he was puttered, because the doctor said he's not allowed to eat it, then even though he ate it, he's still not yetzer. So it goes out kedekach. So if the doctors tell a person they're not supposed to go to Aseres HaDibros, then you'll be besimcha that you didn't go to Aseres HaDibros, just as if you did go to Aseres HaDibros. So there are special people that are especially vulnerable, whether because of their medical condition or because of their age, should consult with their doctors whether it's proper for them to attend Aseres HaDibros, minyonim, and so on and so forth. that applies to minyonim. In a certain way, applies even more to kriyas ateirim. It's at halacha. There's many poskim that hold it's a chiyuv on a tzibur. And it says the Arizal used to make a minyan in his house sometimes, and he didn't even make kriyas ateirim there because it's a tefillas yachid, and it doesn't have the whole gather of a tefillas tzibur. So not everyone like the Arizal. Certainly we make on our porch minyonim if possible kriyas ateirim, but it's not the same chiyuv as other chiyuvim. Nevertheless, if it's possible, then obviously we should be mishtadel that the tiredkeit and the stress that the Rebbe put about men, women, and children hearing Aseres HaDibros, we should make every attempt to do so, as long as it's safe and as long as it's within the guidelines of the government. Okay, so let's first speak about sira for a minyan. You can't do kriyas ateirim without a minyan, and the wachal all the tefillos to have a minyan. So one thing should make clear is that pretty much all of the minyonim, I can't say all the minyonim, I don't know what's happening with all the minyonim, but certainly many of the minyonim, we're talking about using various configurations of the minyan that al-chatchila b'shas hadchakim b'diavad. This is not a normal way to daven. Normal way to daven, all 10 people have to be in one place, the 10 members of the minyan. Now, we have various ways in which we can extend that to call one place, even if it's not physically one place. So how it is you do that to make it considered to one place is very controversial. You're putting together various laws in Shulchan Aruch and how exactly you can apply the laws of putting together a zimun of 10 people to laws of tefillah and vice versa, and the laws of Korban Pesach, what's called a chabura, what's not called a chabura. It's very complicated, and how to apply it precisely in our situations is often a matter of machlekes. I'll make it as simple as I can and tell you where there is a machlekes. There's a din that's brought in the laws of mezuman that if you have two groups, that all together it's 10 people, and the one group can see the other group, even though they're not in the same place, they're in two different rooms, nevertheless, they can be mitzdarif. Even if they don't see each other, if you have the person making the mezuman, let's say it's two rooms, two separate rooms, and then you have the person making the mezuman is sitting on the threshold between the two rooms, and this person can see both groups, so then that's as if the groups themselves saw each other, and therefore, you're allowed to join them together. That is the law by a mezuman. There are many, many differences between the laws of mezuman and putting people together and the laws of a minyan. So it's a chiddush din that we do compare them. The Alter Rebbe compares them, but whether you can compare them to all the details is a matter of disagreement among the achreinim. What does that mean practically for us? So I'll take a very simple case. It says clear in the laws of a mezuman, putting together two groups does not work if there's a reshus harabim in between, even if they can see each other. And the Taz brings down, it's not only a reshus harabim between them, even if it's a pathway that somebody walks, just a single pathway or a walkway, that also divides between the two and prevents them from being joined together. Okay, so the question is, when you want to take that to a minyan, so many of you have asked me, asked other rabbanim, and what's with that? The only way we can make a minyan if the people are on the other side of the street. So, so what in the world is the heter? So it's certainly not a lechatchila. It's a last choice scenario. But there are two reasons why, if you have no other choice, you could do it. One reason is that there are those that learn, since the Alter Rebbe does not mention this restriction in the laws of tefillah, and I can mention names of Rabbanim. We have Chabad Rabbanim that say this, therefore, that the restriction only applies to the law of mezuman and not the law of a minyan. How could that be if the whole source of it is coming from the law of mezuman? Okay, so there's an explanation given for that. There's another heter which applies in our case, and I think it's very relevant to some of the minyonim that have taken place in such a manner, is Ramesh Ternbuch from the Eda in Yerushalayim. Again, with the Chiddush Din, he said that if the porch is 10 tefachim off the ground, which the porches that we're talking about are elevated, so then it's not really being interrupted by the Reshus Harabim. So since they're elevated and the porches are all higher than 10 tefachim and they're all their own Reshus, so then he holds that, again, it's b'shas hadchak, it's b'diavad, have you no other choice. But that's why, if you have no other way, if you can't do it in your backyard, that there's no Reshus Harabim or pathway even, like a sidewalk or a walkway, driveway between two houses. If you don't have any other way of doing it, so then you're allowed to do it on opposite sides of the street, but obviously it's not the preferred way of doing it. It's obviously not the preferred way of doing it being on porches either, but that's what we have available to us at this point. Now, I mentioned that you had by the shliach tzibur, by the mezuman, the one making the mezuman has to be able to see everybody. So Alter Rebbe says by tefillah the same thing applies, and the chazan, the one that's davening from the amud, is required to be able to see all of the people. Okay, so that involves a few difficulties. Let's say the person's around the corner. What does it mean being able to see to see somebody? When these porch minyonim started, so it was before the trees started growing, and then it was easier to see people. Now the trees are all full of leaves, and it becomes more difficult to see people. So is the seeing mean literally seeing, or does it mean being able to see? Let's say you have a shliach tzibur in the shul and they turn off all the lights. He's not allowed to daven if he can't see the people. So it's mistaber lamer. Let's say it's at night and it's dark and you can't see the people. If it would be light out, then you could see the people. So now that it's dark and you can't see the people, but the logic would indicate, although it's obviously better that you should be able to see them, but nevertheless, okay, we just hit the mute all button. We'll see how long that works for. I thought I hit it before. We have some questions. You'll be able to unmute yourself. Okay, so obviously it's better if everyone literally sees each other, but if that's not possible and the only restriction is that it's dark, I don't think that would invalidate the minyan. As far as the trees are concerned, that's more difficult, because you can have cases, trees are a valid mechitza al pi shulchan aruch. If you have the trees growing and they're oimed baruch matzuya, that if there's a regular wind, they don't blow around, and there's no 3 tefachim off the ground, and that could be a valid mechitza al pi shulchan aruch. So to say that that does not have significance halachically is difficult to say. On the other hand, a couple of branches flying in the air, it might be different. In any case, it's definitely worthwhile cutting down those branches or breaking them off in order to enable the chazan to be able to see everybody. Another issue, and this is only shasat chak b'diavad. The question is, let's say you don't have the shliach tzibur is not able to see everybody. So there are those that say the following: you have a din that the source of the din, as I mentioned, it's a Gemara Brachas, and it's the law of a mezuman, that it says, that if some of the people see each other, which implies that if you have by the mezuman the two groups, let's say there's 5 in one room and 5 in the other room. So let's say 2 people from this room see 2 people in this room. So the other 5, they can't see each other, but these 2 people and these 2 people do see each other. I don't know how to make it go. Let's say the 2 people like this see each other, okay, but the other people are not seen. So that seems miktsasam. There's some of these that can see some of these. So the lashon implies, I was not able to find it. I've spoken to a number of rabbanim. Nobody can find it. If any of the listeners can give me a makar, I would be very pleased to find it. But Eitzer Chachma, you have something, Rabbi Schneer? If you have a makar for it that says befeirish, I mean, the lashon is mashma like.
Okay. Rabbi, אני מצטער לעצור אותך, אבל
I'm sorry, let me leave the questions for the end, or it's a comment on this Indian, or it's a question?
Yeah, it's a question and at the end. Because anyway, we cannot go to the shul. We cannot go to the shul. We cannot daven on the street. As this is
not. You're exempt.
If you can speak about Shavuot, it doesn't give. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm leaving.
Okay, sorry. In any case, so if you have only miktsasam, the chazan is not able to see anybody, everybody. So b'diavad b'shasat chak, then you could be mitzvah. As far as kriyas ateiram, which the Aseres HaDibros is very, very relevant to Shavuos, and in general kriyas ateiram. So there's differences in again, there's a Tzemach Tzedek speaks about the Chiyuv HaKriya, since we don't read the Torah like it used to be done, that some people were, the people being called for the Aliyah would themselves be the ones reading. So how is it that the person making the bracha and somebody else is reading? What happens if the person is blind? Let's say the person is Am Haaretz, he doesn't know how to read. How is he Yates? A whole discussion, a whole machlekes, Tzemach Tzedek brings down, all the Paskim bring down, everyone talks about it. Bottom line, there are those that say that the Balkeira should take all the aliyahs, and there's a takana that he should say Yom Tov 5 aliyahs, Shabbos 7 aliyahs, and he should take all the aliyahs itself. There's another opinion that says there's no problem, everybody saying from their place, since as long as they can hear. If that's the case, they don't read along, since they're not reading from the Sefer Torah. They stand Be'ema B'yira and listen to the Kriya from the Balkeira, and as those that remember from 770, the people make the aliyahs from their place. And although there's reason to differentiate, but nevertheless, many Rabbi Chabad have allowed that, and whichever way you've been doing is good. Now, but to have Kriyas HaTorah, you still need a minyan, okay? And Kriyas HaTorah is not just the Aseres HaDibros, it's the entire Kriya. Being metaltal a Sefer Torah is a very serious inyan. There's a question. So everybody's tefillah should still be pale, but there's a possibility always of there being a rain, chas v'shalom. So then there's no question. It's also Isser Gomer it's a bizayin for the Sefer Torah to bring it outside, and then one is not allowed to do Kriyas HaTorah in such a case. And then we're back in the position of Reb Susha, that what should we do? So it's a mitzvah by Minach Chabad when there's rain in the sukkah, so you're potter, but we sit in the sukkah anyway. But it's not the same. But taking a Sefer Torah on the rain is the Isser Gomer. One is not allowed to do it. Even if you have a porch, you can put it under a porch, but then the wind is going to blow the rain in, unless you have some sort of system to thick one of these Shabbos clear tablecloths. And even then, I don't really think it's practical. If you have a situation where you could put the Sefer Torah in the house, and it could still be heard by 10 people. Since now, okay, well, I'll leave that for a little later, because something just wanted to show. But if you're unable to not have a place to go to, then there's no question one is absolutely patur. So again, it's a big mitzvah from the Rabbi, but not every time we're able to do everything. And if it's medically not advisable, then it should not be done. Now, another issue, for the minyonim, it's not an issue, but when it comes to Aseres HaDibros, so there are women and children that are coming, it becomes the issue of taruvas. So we know that if you have a shul without a mechitza, so there's the letter in the back of the Tilim that says you're not allowed to answer amen to a kaddish that's being said over there. It's very, very severe inyan to daven in a place where there's no mechitza. So there's several parts of this issue, and we'll try to apply it to the issue of the porches in a moment. You have different levels of kedusha. So you have a Beis HaKnesses. So Beis HaKnesses must have a separation, a physical separation. To Ramesha held the mechitza was enough to have 5 feet. We hold the mechitza has to be 6 feet. Okay, there has to be a solid mechitza which is dividing between the men and the women. And all the old European shuls, they have balconies. Some 70 is a balcony. So if they're in a separate reshus by themselves and they're behind the balcony, not seen, then that's fine. Our balconies are not necessarily the same as far as being mechalik reshus, making a separate domain for themselves. It's good, but they're all open from the bottom. So yeah, okay, it's true. The men don't have to look up there. Who asked you to look up there? But nevertheless, it's not the ideal situation. On the other hand, we say that our porch minyonim are not really a shul. They don't have kedusha Beis HaKnesses. When you make mincha in New Baltimore on the way to New York, so there are people walking around over there, and you don't require that there necessarily be a mechitza there. So you try to find a quiet corner, but it doesn't have the din of a shul. It's not a shul. So to our porch minyonim, that it's like a mikdash ma'at, but it's only ma'at. So they don't have the din. They don't have the din of a shul. Nevertheless, we have 2 problems. That we have a problem even in your house when you're davening around your own family. You actually have 3 problems. You have an issue of even if it's your own family, of erva, that you're not allowed to be mispal connected like a bracha learn Torah in front of an erva, and an erva could be uncovered elbow, and that's or legs that are not covered properly, a girl over the age of 3. I heard Befedish from Zalman Shimon that as far as the Isser Amira, you had the girls climbing all the tables in 770. I said, what's the din? He says, no question, you're not allowed to daven. You have to turn the other direction. You have to do something of the sort. We hold that a married woman's uncovered hair is also has the din of an erva, so that's something that has to be taken care of, even if you're in your own house. So too, to daven, even if it's your wife or one of your, not to daven within Dalar Amas. There are makedas that bring down the person shouldn't daven within Dalar Amas, within approximately 6 feet, 2 meters. See, we're back the distancing way back before that, then you're from Dalar Amas. We got the 2 meters from back there. So, in addition, we have inyan of istaklus. They shouldn't be looking at the women. Now, in order to be masad the kriyas hatera with a mechitza, so I saw one of the Bata Dinim came out that they have all of these minyonim that are outside that you have to set up a mechitza. So I'm not sure how practically that would be. If you have mechitza, you can put up a mechitza that's 6 feet tall, then you should do so. Practically speaking, difficult to do. So what I did was I put together some pictures and I put this on the screen over here and maybe just give this an idea. So here is an aerial view of Westbury. This is Westbury over here, and here's a bunch of houses, and I numbered the backyards here. So you see in these houses and in this particular minyan, all of these people are able to hear, and as long as not too many branches, are able to see. So let's say the Balkeda is reading from house number 1. Okay, so what you could do is you could have the women and children spread out, a few of them in each of these places. And the truth is, if the men are on the balcony and the women are in the backyard and they're facing Mizrach, like in this case, and you can say it's a separate reshus, it's not really a problem. But practically speaking, it's much better. There's no restriction. Originally, the government said it was a Are you all able to see this?
Yeah.
Yes, it's clear.
Okay, I'm not going to look at the questions until the end because there's a lot to cover. So I'm sorry if I didn't get to your questions, but. Okay, so let's say the person is reading over here. So what would be the more sensible thing to do is take the men that are part of the minyan and put them in these 2 courtyards here, in these two backyards, or in these 4 or these 6, whatever the case is. And either you have the men all over here and you have the women in these, the women and children over here, or you have the women over here and you split them out in the courtyard. It's a very simple thing to do. And similarly, if the Kriyas HaTorah is happening from number 4, so then you have the ones immediately around with the men, and the further on the outside, the women should be able to hear, obviously, and then that's okay. That would be, I think, in this particular configuration. I mean, every minyan have to figure it out for themselves, but that's just an example of how you could avoid this whole problem of the mixing together. Obviously, you're trying to listen to Aseres HaDibros in order to add to Kedusha, so there should be teenage boys and teenage girls together, or grown-ups, and so on and so forth. Would not seem, according to me, to be the best way to spread Kedusha. Here's a picture of a backyard. It didn't come out so clearly, and especially you can see all the trees over here. But here is a. I'm sorry, it's hard to see, but you can see over here is a duplex. So here's the upstairs, and you can see there's a porch on the upstairs, and then you can have a porch on the ground floor over here, and then down over here is the grass. And here you see is the top of a chain link fence, dividing between one backyard and the other. Now, right on the side of this porch is elevated. So if somebody stands, if the women are standing right where it says number 1, they're able to hear very well, and they're behind the mechitza. Now, they're behind the mechitza as long as the men are on that side and not on this side. But at least as far as the men on that side, there is a mechitza. They could go, if there's not enough room, and the families have to be 2 meters apart. So then another group could go further down the steps over here. You have the driveway down over here. So it's just a way of spreading people out. Here's another picture over here. So here's another picture. So here again this is the first floor, and there's a balcony on the second floor, and a balcony on the first floor, a deck on the first floor. So women that are standing over here are also, they're really behind the mechitza. And so to the standing over here, they're also behind the mechitza. And the further, there's the steps, there's a driveway. As long as they're able to hear, they don't need to be able to see the Sefer Torah. And there's no problem. That way it's preserving the union of Kedusha without sacrificing, sacrificing the actual union of Aseres HaDibros. So it should also be mentioned for those, for whatever reason it's impossible. The Rebbe, every time he mentioned, I'm not saying it's not a reason not to do it, but the Rebbe would always mention, you bring the children to the Beis HaKnesses. Okay, Divrei HaKosov behavior, that's the normal way, what you would do, but the Rebbe many times mentioned to bring to a Makom Kodesh, you bring it to a holy place. And although, every house has Beis Chabad on it, and at every house a holy place to a certain extent, nevertheless, the same thing does not apply. Okay, just another couple of things about our unusual way of davening, and then we'll get to the laws of Yom Tov. The one that left because you want to hear about Shavuos, we'll talk about Shavuos, we'll talk about Yom Tov a little bit, but just a couple of other things which are relevant to there's a din. Actually, I had it over here on the screen. Let me put it back. About you have the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, Siman Reish Samach Ches, where he speaks about, among other things, Friday night saying Mogen Oves. And when you say Mogen Oves, so it says you don't say it except at Beis HaKnesses Kavua. Alter Rebbe says in Siman Tezvav, because the people used to daven out in the field, and they would daven at night, and then would come back, and it would be dangerous. So the whole people later in the shul, so everybody should be protecting each other. So they were masakin to say Mogen Oves. And then Alter Rebbe says, and we're not so worried about this whole idea of sakana, but it's a takanas chacham, and it was not bottled. Okay. However, so if we're only keeping the original takana, so the original din only applied when there was a Beis HaKnesses kavua. But if you're just davening temporarily in a place, you get together for Shev Brachas or something like this, so then that's not done with the din of a Beis HaKnesses kavua. So then Alter Rebbe brings down Yesh Misha Heira. The Taz says that when they used to go to the Yerid, they would make these big marketplaces, and they would stay there for a few weeks. So the Taz says, then over there, Yesh Ma'achrin, and therefore it also has the din, you should say it over there. And Alter Rebbe concludes, Ein limches biyodam. So you don't reprimand them. So it's obvious Alter Rebbe is not terribly in favor of this. The question is, do our Porch minyonim, since obviously we don't know if we're returning to the Beis HaKnesses here or we're returning straight to the Beis HaKnesses in Yerushalayim with the coming of Mashiach. But right now, this is our kviyas, and it has been like this for several months. So anyway, among Rabbanei Chabad, there are those that say that you're allowed to, that it's like a Yerid, and also the Mekubalim say that al pi Kabbalah one should say the bracha. The one paragraph, Mogen Oves, there's no question you can say that even if you're by yourself in your house, you can say that. The question is, you're making a bracha. How are you making that bracha? So the Rabbanei Chabad that say you should make the bracha, you can make the bracha, you should make the bracha, especially al derech HaKabbalah. And there are others that say that no, we don't, and it's a machlekes among Rabbanei Chabad, and whichever way you do is acceptable. Another inyan which is relevant to the laws of Shabbos, one of the questions mailed in was that wearing a mask outside on Shabbos, and the din is you are allowed to wear a mask outside on Shabbos as long as it is securely attached to whichever part of your ears or your neck, however it is, that it shouldn't fall out, and you might come to carry it in the Reshus HaRabbi. Obviously, Yom Tov, that's not an issue, but on Shabbos, that is an issue. Now, as far as different other tefillas, so Birchas Kainim, so that will depend on the minyan in each place. So it's very, very clear. It's in the Gemara and Shulchan Aruch, the people that cannot come to Birchas Kainim, they're covered. The Kainim have in mind Amsha Besodes, no matter where they are, and especially over here, they're Kainim down further towards the east, and when they turn around and face west, they'll be including everybody in their bracha, and therefore that would be advisable, unless one has a very good separation between the men and the women, to restrict their participation to Kriyas HaTeira, Aseres HaDibros, and not from Musaf and Birchas Kainim. If there's a good separation, there's no reason they can't stay. but otherwise it's better to avoid that. Yizker can be said in one's house without any problem. If there would be no choice and there was no minyan on Shabbos, then one could even say the first day. And Eretz Yisrael B'chal, there's only one day, they say only the first day. So then that's not an issue. The Kohanim themselves should wash their own hands. And if they have difficulty, they're davening in somebody's backyard, then they should wash before they leave their house and guard their hands so they shouldn't become dirty. B'chal for Kriyas HaTorah, it's possible to make several times Kriyas HaTorah in the course of the day. And in the event that Chas v'Shalom it does rain, I mean, right now it's very low chances of rain, but if it does, so then people will make up to come back an hour later or something like that. Someone suggested, it's an idea to plan l'chatchila, that if at the time for Kriyas HaTorah originally established, let's say people plan for 11:45 Kriyas HaTorah. So they say, okay, if they can't do it, everybody should come back at 1. And you see if you can lane at 1. If not, you come back at 2. It's a long day. So sometimes it's not going to be raining. In any case, the requirement to make Kriyas HaTorah, l'chatchila, there should be at least 6 men that have not heard. And of course, you need a whole minyan there, so it have to be 4. But even if they were yates already Kriyas HaTorah, the other 4 can count to round out the minyan. But it's entire Kriyas HaTorah, not just Aseres HaDibros, and with the Haftarah, and so on. Now, as far as just mention a few dinim of Hilchos Yom Tov that were asked, especially if there's rain, there's sun, and different things. Carrying an umbrella is also on Yom Tov as well as on Shabbos. It's in of an Eil Arai. And being an Eil Arai, it should not be opened, and even if it was opened beforehand, it shouldn't be carried on Shabbos or Yom Tov. So umbrellas are off limits. If you have a awning or a covering, as long as it's not completely covered, it's a tefach opened, so then you could open it up on Shabbos and Yom Tov and roll it back as long as it was open a tefach beforehand. As far as using hot water on Yom Tov, so it depends what type of hot water heater you have. The old style hot water heaters were not a problem of using on Yom Tov, because even though when you let out hot water, cold water comes in, but then it's cooking the cold water, which is why you're not allowed to use hot water on Shabbos, even if the water was cooked before Shabbos, because cold water automatically comes in, and that cold water gets cooked by the hot water, which is in the hot water tank. But on Yom Tov, bishul, heating up water is allowed, so therefore that would not be a problem. The potential problem is that once the temperature goes down to a certain level, the thermostat kicks in, and then it starts a fire. So if you have a gas pilot, then it's less of a problem, but there's still the mechanism of the thermostat working. A bigger problem is when you have a electric starter, which means there's no actual flame there, and the electric starter starting things off is a problem. So that's even the old style ones, but we say it's not a psikration. When you take out some hot water, it doesn't mean that the thermostat is going to go down, and you're causing mavir, making a flame, or turning on the electricity, is a rabbinic prohibition on Yom Tov. It's a biblical prohibition on Shabbos, but only rabbinic on Yom Tov, and that's why certain things, it's the Makkah mitzvah, say a Godel, you can ask a non-Jew to do it for you on Yom Tov. But turning on the hot water, if it's a regular old style hot water heater, is not a problem. But some of the newer ones, which are using heat exchangers and there are different types that automatically, when you turn on the hot water, some of the newer type hot water heaters automatically cause mavir. So then it's a psikresha, and then it's problematic. So you'd have to ask about your particular type, whether you can use it or not. Making a new flame is prohibited on Yom Tov, and therefore you have to leave a yahrzeit licht or something of that sort. If you have a gas flame, then you can leave that on and light from there. As far as lighting a match, you can light a match from another flame. But to light a match, let's say you have an electric burner, and the electric burner is red hot. So a red hot piece of metal has the law of fire. The Rambam holds that you heat up a piece of metal till it comes red hot. So that has the din of fire. You have all discussion in the poskim. If something needs sliesh, if you have a red hot piece of metal, is it good enough? In any case, if you have a red hot piece of metal and you want to light a match from that, so that would be okay. You want to light any sort of toothpick, whatever, to make a flame, to light something, then it's not a problem. However, if it's just hot and it's not red, so then the problem making a new flame is like melet, making something new. So since the element is not red hot, so then you would not be able to take a fire from that. You would have to take it from an existing flame. Now, to get to some of the dinim which are unique to Shavuos, so we have the Milchik Asuda. There are many, many reasons given from all the commentaries of why it is that we eat dairy on Shavuos. And people always ask, do you have to have a dairy meal? So you have to have a meat meal because Yom Tov. You have to have dairy meal, so you should have a dairy meal before, because the meat meal, you're going to have to wait 6 hours before you can eat milchiks. Mashenkin, if you have milchiks before fleishiks, so then you don't have to wait 6 hours. How long do you have to wait? So if you look in the Shulchan Aruch, you don't really have to wait at all. You just have to clean out your mouth. The minhag ha'elam is to wait a half hour. When the first time they gave in, it's a minhag Chabad is to wait 1 hour. How do we know minhag Chabad is to wait for 1 hour? Because when they first came out with the Mifsaim, started printing brochures, all the brochures were giving into the Rebbe. The Rebbe would often comment on them. When it came Shavuos, they gave him the Shavuos brochure, and they had a recipe for cheesecake, of course. And the cheesecake of deraisa. The Rambam holds a minhag Yisrael, midiraisa. So not the cheesecake, some sort of milchiks. In any case, you have they had a recipe for cheesecake there, and they gave the instructions. First you eat the dairy, and then you wait a half hour in between, and the Rebbe wrote on the brochure, minhag Chabad shah achas. So that's how we know that's minhag Chabad. That 1 hour time period is measured from the time you finish eating the dairy until the time you start eating fleishik. So therefore, when you finish eating the cheesecake, so then there's a time period before you break up that meal, and you have to make a bracha achreina, because separating the sud is something also required up your Shulchan Aruch. You can't eat milchiks and fleishiks in the same meal, so you have to separate the meals at least by making a bracha achreina. And then when you're going to wash for the fleishik meal, so first you wash, and then people have fish. So until you get to the fleishiks, time passes also. So that all is included in that hour. So you don't have to wait an hour before you can wash for the fleishik meal. It's an hour altogether between the milchiks and the fleishiks. If one has hard cheese, so then there's a 6-hour waiting period. What constitutes hard cheese? There's a very big machlekes poskim. Many of the Eretz Yisrael gedela poskim held the Gvinat Huva, which in Eretz Yisrael you had to wait 6 hours, even though it was not aged for 6 months. Many disagreed with that. In general, on this side of the ocean, the American Rabbanim in general, with the notable exception of Hendel Olav Shalom, held that if it was not aged for 6 months, you don't need to wait 6 hours. Rabbi Hendel held that since the process by which they are producing the cheese, by isolating the powerful enzymes and bacteria that they can produce the same product in much less time, and it's barely distinguishable. The one that's aged 6 months, the one that's not aged 6 months, he held for all of these hard cheeses, you would have to wait for 6 hours. But certainly cream cheese and cottage cheese and sour cream and things like this, 1 hour is sufficient. As far as kashering a fleishik oven to milchik, so it's much easier to kasher from fleishik to, normally we don't kasher utensils from fleishik to milchik and back and forth, because people might get mixed up. But an exception is made, especially for an oven, because not everyone has the room or the ability to have a milchik oven or fleishik oven. And the law is that it's easier to kasher also, because all you need is libun kal, whereas for iser, for something which was mamish treif, so then you have to have a higher level of kashering, libun gomer. But for milchik to fleishik or vice versa, if it was all kosher, then you only need a libun kal, which is much easier. The problem is that the oven has to be absolutely clean, otherwise the libun kal doesn't work, because libun kal, I'm purposely not going into definition of libun kal, because it's really not very practical to do in most places, because that works only for the taste that's absorbed in a keli. But if there's food there, then it doesn't do any good, libun kal. And ovens are notoriously difficult to clean. And once you're self-cleaning it, that's already libun gomer anyway. So I don't expect most people, in order to bake a cheesecake, are going to put on easy off and let all the guk drip down over there and make themselves all schmutzig cleaning an oven. But if you do, then that's fine, and you can do libun kal. As far as the recipes, just again, it's a side thing, but it's also important. it comes Shavuos, a Yom Tov, with Makabel the Torah, that everybody agrees that Boy Nami Lachem, that you have to have the greatest simcha because we receive the Torah. So obviously, this is not the time to be making bracha levatol and things like this. So when a person is having mezainis, so there are different types of mezainis. You have a cake, so it's a cake. Yira kazayis, kiddush, makom suda. There is an opinion that says, by the way, you have to wash for that meal, but that does not seem to be the minig. The source for that is that one of the reasons that Ramah brings that because of the shtei alechem, the 2 loaves that they would bring on Shavuos in the Beis Hamikdash, so that's a remes. So you have to have two meals on Shavuos, 1 milchik, 1 fleshik. Then it would have to be a lechem, but the minig elam is not like that, and zainis is fine. So you make kiddush on wine, then you have to have kiddush makom suda. You have to have at least a kazayis of something which is mezainis. Then after you finish, you make a bracha main shalish, and you include within it, as long as you had a revius of wine, could be eitz a kiddush without a revius of wine, but to make the bracha achrena, you need a revius. All you need is a reiv revius in order to moli lugmav, in order to be eitz a kiddush. But you have to have for the bracha achrena, you have to drink a revius. According to different days, but it should be at the beginning. You can't drink half a revius at the beginning, half a revius at the end of the meal, and then make a bracha achrena. It has to be within a certain period of time. Then you include the ala michya and ala gefen together in one bracha when you make the bracha achrena. But there are some recipes, especially if you have a cheesecake with a very thin crust. So we say that even though it's a minority, and normally you go after majority, but when you're eating it for the taste, when you have intention to eat it, and you make a mezainis, and the mezainis would cover the whole cheesecake. But the only way you can make an al-michya if it's kazayis b'chtei achilas pras, which is roughly 1/6 of the mixture. And if it's less than that, in other words, if there's 6 times more filling in terms of volume, 6 times more filling than crust, then you cannot make an al-michya on it. And therefore, you should have a kazayis of regular mezainis in order to be able to make the al-michya. That's a side din. As far as Tikkun Leil Shavuos, so Tikkun Leil Shavuos, you can start even right after Lechtzen. You can start Tikkun Leil Shavuos, by the time it hits Alas HaShachar, you run into a problem with Birchas HaShachar, because Alas HaShachar is already the beginning of the next day, Lagabe many dinim. So you have, for example, so the Rebbe said you shouldn't daven right after people stay up all night. When chaparayna davening, they're davening, early in the morning, and then they're potter from till mincha. They can sleep 14 hours. Chas v'shalom, such a thing, especially on Shavuos. So the Rebbe always said also, the daven with proper yishuv adas, you should sleep some beforehand. So some, especially it's Yom Tov, you don't have an alarm clock. So there's something called Zman Kriyashma. So you have to say Kriyashma. Zman Kriyashma on Friday is 9:01. So you have to say Shema before 9:01. What's the earliest you can say? You can say Shema. So in general, you say for Misha Yakir is general the time you say the Vasikin used to say, but before they used to say Shema and finish right before Netzachama, and then they daven Shemana Esra by Netzachama. Netzachama on Friday is 5:10 in the morning. Okay. Misha Yakir is 3:50. So there's not really that much time between Alas HaShachar and Misha Yakir this time of the year. When is Alas HaShachar? So it depends. If you look at all the luchais in general, it's 16.1 degrees, which is 3:07 in the morning. And if you use the shear, which is normally used in Montreal, based on the psak of the Rabbi, the Paparov, which is 14 degrees, and it's 3:28 instead of 3:07. So when it comes to a tanis, that's why it says in the Vad calendar, it uses the later time, so everybody can eat a little longer until the later share of Amos HaShachar. How long do you have to stay up with the Tikkun Leil Shavuos? So then if you want to be consistent, so then you can have 14 degrees, is Alas HaShachar. In any case, one should try to finish all the Tikkun beforehand so you don't run into all shayla with the Birchas HaShachar. After Amod HaShachar, it's a good idea before you go to sleep to say Kriya Shema, because b'diavad you would be Yetze. It's not lechatchila to say after Amud HaShachar, but b'diavad you would be Yetze. It's say 3 paragraphs for Shema before going to sleep. Okay, Erev Tavshilin. Erev Tavshilin, when Yom Tov falls out, the Thursday, Friday, So then you have Erev Tavshilin has to be done on Wednesday before Lichtzen for Yom Tov Rishon. B'diavad, if a person forgot, they can make Yom Tov Rishon on Thursday. They can make an Erev. They can make an Erev Tavshilin out tonight. But when it's Friday and Shabbos, you can't do that. The tonight doesn't work. So you really have to remember to do the Erev Tavshilin tomorrow, sometime during the day. If there's a chance you might forget, then you do it earlier in the day. There's no mitzvah to leave it to the last minute. On the contrary, there are two elements that are Erev Tavshilin. One of them is a cooked food, a kazayas, at least of a cooked food, and the other is a challah or a matzah. But the one which is the crucial element is the cooked food, cooked or baked. Take a Michael Chashuv, but any cooked or baked food was very lenient. It says if you scraped off with the knife a kazayas of fat, that's also good for Erev Tavshilin. It says in the Gemara and Shulchan Aruch. But l'chatchila, you take a Michael Chashuv and you set it aside. It cannot be eaten until all the preparations for Shabbos are done. So that should be set aside in a safe place, and that has to be done before Yom Tov comes in tomorrow. The idea of being mazaka the Erev al yedei acher, which says in the Siddur and is brought down Shulchan Aruch and Hilchos Erevin, l'gabe Erev Chatzeres, it says that l'chatchila you take somebody that's not a relative of yours. Today, that's not really possible, or in most cases. So there's no problem a man giving it to his wife. The Be'ikar Adin, we paskin that is also acceptable. So under these conditions, you're not going to walk around the street and with social distancing and get a ma'aseh. Somebody should pick up your Erev Tavshilin. So first of all, you could use one of your immediate family members. That's not a problem. There's some immediate family members of B'chal, not saying Mechal Shulchani. If they're in your house, you can also use them, but not to go into it. You can use anybody to be Mizak al Yedei Acher. And you don't have to be Mizak al Yedei Acher. Why does everybody in the city have to make Erev Tavshilin for the whole city? The Rav has to remember to make for the whole city. And then the whole city is already included. So why does everybody have to make for the whole city? So Mustam, it's in your Ruchni. I'm sure there's halachic reasons for it too, but every single person has to make for the whole city. Okay, obviously, so whatever the reason might be. So l'chatchila you should do it. And you can be Mizak al Yedei Acher. It's not a problem, but that Acher doesn't have to be somebody that's not related to you. It's perfectly acceptable to use a family member. But one has to be careful that cooked food remains intact. Also, the cooking for Shabbos must be complete early enough before Shabbos that people could eat it. So there are those that have a minig that when it comes making cholent for Shabbos, they put up a raw cholent for Shabbos and they put it on a slow burner. It says in the Gemara that if you put in one piece of raw meat, even if the whole pot was cooked, but one raw piece of meat is enough that you have Hesach Hadas, and you don't have the whole problem of Shia and the other Isurim which are regarding the Shabbos. But when it's Shabbos going into Yom Tov, you're running into, according to the Alter Rebbe, an Issa D'Oraisa, because you're only allowed to cook on Yom Tov for Yom Tov. You're not allowed to cook on Yom Tov for Shabbos. And that you have an inyan of Bachana, which is it seems clear according to Alter Rebbe, it's an Issa D'Oraisa. And so how Erev Tavshilin you can do away with Issa D'Oraisa? So the answer is that since it's early enough that you could eat it on Yom, at least theoretically, if a bunch of orchim came in, comes all the starving group of bacharim over there, then they don't have anything to eat. So then you could feed it to them. So therefore it's being cooked. At least it has the potential of being cooked for Yom Tov. You're planning on using it for Shabbos, but it could be eaten on Yom Tov, then it's only Nisa D'Rabban. If the Rabbanim say, hey Amru, hey Amru, the same Chachamim that said that it's prohibited to cook food under such conditions, say that it's an Erev Tavshilin, it's okay. But you can't use Erev Tavshilin to allow you to do Nisa D'Oraisa. So putting up food to cook, that with the raw piece of meat over there, which is not going to be edible on Friday, for Yom Tov is an Issa D'Oraisa to cook. So therefore, everything has to be cooked earlier in the day that it should be edible, at least by lichtzen, that it should be edible. But the Avid, if you weren't able to do it, if the Machal Ben Derusoy, there might be you'd have to ask a shayla in such a case. So that's that. Okay, so let me take some. Oh, there's a lot of questions here. I said I would have no time for questions, and now look at all the questions here. Okay, question number one. What if there's a chain link fence, a short row of bushes 4 feet high? It has to do with the, Bayos Mechitza has to do not only with the din of a Mechitza, has to do with Istaklus. So if you have a chain link fence, it's like it was the famous shul in Manhattan that they wanted to attract a young crowd, so they put up a glass mechitza. Yeah, glass mechitza. It says mamish mechitza, chazaka, strong glass mechitza, but everybody's staring at each other the whole time. So obviously, it's not going to suffice for the inyan of histaklus. Okay, Rabbi, we know that davening outside is not ideal. If you have a minyan that relies on 4 yards covered by bushes, the minyan is sketch kosher. Is it better to just daven inside alone? Listen, it's a shasat chak, and what would be under the present conditions that the government now loosened the law, there's no reason that the 4 have to daven in 4 separate places. Let them come together, that they're all in one courtyard. You're going to have 10 people in the backyard of one person. So I don't see why one should need to rely on that. So that would be a simple solution to the whole issue. Next question: am I correct to understand that kol zman the chazan can see mispal and vice versa, then the minyan and mitzdaref? It's even if it's not that they see back, as long as the chazan is a clear din al tereb shulchan aruch. I had it over here. I'll show it for everybody so you can see it inside yourself. I decided that since I set up al peh, I don't need to show it in the writing, but I have over here in Siman Nun Aleph, Siman Nun Hey, excuse me, in Hilchos Tefillah, Sif Yud Zayin, Mikzosim Befnim, Mikzosim Bachutz. So that means some are inside and some are outside. So they're in 2 separate Reshuyos, Vashatz Al Gabe Askufa, Techa Pesach Umitzarfen. If there's somebody in between, he joins them together. Why is that? Mibnei Shehu Reya Eilu Ve'eilu. Since he can see everybody else, then it's fine. What's the Yisei that it is that Ki'ila mixes aimdim b'chutz, nirim and mixes aimdim b'fnim, shem mitzdarfim. So if you have some of the people inside, see some of the people outside, that's for sure good. So when you have the chazan that can see everybody, it's also good. That's the way the Alter Rebbe seems to learn. It's people, okay, there's others that want to learn differently, but that's certainly okay. I'm not sure what was said about putting clear plastic over the Sefer Torah in case of rain. I don't advise it because I don't think it's really practical. It's a long enough day that certainly there'll be some time not to rain. Theoretically speaking, if somebody could do such a thing, you wrap up the whole table in a tent. But I don't really see that happening. My berachas kainim, I'm not exactly sure what the question is. You have a minyan, they make berachas kainim if they have a kain. If not, and then there should be lechatchila somebody responsible for each minyan. I know that they were talked to from each minyan, but it didn't really materialize as a group. But each one should take responsibility. There should be a kain by the minyan, and if you don't have, then and you're included with the other kainim that are duchen. It's better if you have a clear delineation, a system to where the women are separate from the men, so they could stay for berachos kainim. It's not a problem. But if there's any sort of taruvas, they should go home right after kriyas hateva. Mayim yiskar. They can say Yiskar at home. So the women say Yiskar at home. Again, if you have a situation where it's very easy for them to say, and there's no taruvas, they could come for Yiskar. Somebody wrote over Yemasha also b'Chag Pesach. You can have other ones say Yiskar for you, but you could say Yiskar at home. It's not a problem. Do you make a bracha achrein after cheesecake or rely on benching afterwards? I'm not sure how to rely on benching afterwards. According to the Rebbe, when you eat mezenis, you have to make a bracha achreina before you wash. So even if you benched afterwards, you'd have to make the bracha achreina afterwards if it hadn't been digested yet. So it's not an eitzah. So one should have a kazayas of regular mezenis. So you might not fit your culinary taste that you had your cheesecake and your mom is sitting over there b'rakia shvi, and then you're gonna have to eat some Ritz crackers. But that's what you have to do, We're not mahadir in Yonei Achila with such a case. What's with kriya later on the day, like mincha time, if the weather clears up? Yeah, that's fine. You can do it then. There's a big machlekes of poskim when you do it. There are those that want to say that since that the time has reached for mincha, you should daven mincha first. But there are others that disagree, and I would advise to do like that. You do the kriyas hatera first, and you daven mincha afterwards. Fine. What about Am Shachet HaKainim? Fine. So the Am Shachet HaKainim is when they have a choice and they were able to go before the Kainim, and they're not. We just learned Masechta Seita, yeah? So if they had a choice, then they showed that the bracha is not dear in their eyes, so therefore they're not included in the bracha. But if it's an anus, and that's the Am Shabbasadis, and they're unable to come, so then they're included in the bracha. Maken Yochel Liyais Pon of Ladaram. Halacha misha acheri akein. You want to unmute yourself and clarify the question? Abramu.
Yes, the question is if we all have to be in front of the kohen.
The kain, to be included in Birchas Kainim, you have to be either on the front or the side, not behind. So if the kain is, if they're on the side of the kain, they should face inwards. So if the kain is facing this way, so the arm is facing this way. If a person standing on the side, they should be facing the kain from the side. Instead of facing Mizrach, they should be facing the kain. As long as on the side, they're included in the bracha.
But could the kohen be facing a different direction? Not Mizrach. Could the kohen not stand at Mizrach?
The kain is supposed to be facing in Mizrach side facing Ma'ariv. So even though he's only one person and everybody else, I mean, if it's impossible any other way, Kriyas HaTeira, if you can't pull off Kriyas HaTeira by facing in the proper way, bidi evid with our davening is over Shas Chak. So if it's Yefsha ben Yanacher, so then you can move things around, but there's probably no reason to do that. Is a recording available anywhere? I don't know. I said it should be recorded, but we'll see. How about putting clear plastic over Sefer Torah in case of rain? Again, this is something I think I just mentioned before. It's definitely not ideal, and I'm curious how exactly that would work. I could just see people taking out these thin plastic tablecloths and they're going to blow in the rain, and the putting the Sefer Torah in any sort of sakana does not pay. Certainly you would if there's any danger whatsoever, no hagba, no galila, you roll up the Sefer Torah. But I wouldn't bring it out when it's raining or if there's any chance of something dripping on it. Lighting a ner neshama for parents before Shabbos. So if that's your minig, Chabad, it's not necessarily the minig, but for those that do, it's a big machlekes haposkim, because again, you're doing something on Yom Tov, but that to be included in the Erev Tavshilin, the minig seems to be to allow it. I also wanted to mention, as far as Erev Tavshilin, if somebody is not cooking, they're eating at somebody else's house. So normally if they're benching licht in their own house, there's a machlekes haposkim about whether they make a bracha or not. They still need, since they're doing a malacha for Shabbos, so when they light that candle, so they're doing a malacha, and it's not for Yom Tov, it's for Shabbos. So therefore you need an Erev Tavshilin for that. But since there's no, you say it ladluka shraga in the nusach, but there's still a machlekes haposkim whether that's enough to make a bracha just on that. So the proper thing to do would be to cook some hot water or something like that at least, put it up for Shabbos morning. Based on the lacha just stated about some being inside and some outside, people diving inside said by a window, if the chazan can see them, they're moving their property for more people outside. You can do it as long as you can see and you can hear. And you understand, each porch is anyway. That's one of the reasons that even in the best of moods, that you can see and you can hear, and there's no Reshus Rabim, that there are poskim that say that they have to be mamish b'makam echad, and if there's just two porches with 5 people on each, since each one is a Reshus HaYachid for itself, each one is on Reshut, there are poskim that say you're also not mitzdaref. So we don't paskin like them, but still it's not ideal. So if you're inside, you're also but the chazan has to be able to see everybody. So it all depends how it is. Oh, that was privately, so I don't have to answer it. You'll have to be privately. Have in mind not to be Yetza, to lane later on, to be part of 10 later. Yes, he can. For a Balkeda, Zela Yakal, 10th Efshar Liknais. Zelo Yakar, 10th Efshar Liknais. You can buy a tent to do Kriyas HaTeira. Then everybody has to be inside the. Everybody's gonna have to be inside the tent, or they're gonna have the minyan be inside the tent. Okay, sounds good to me. Maybe we could post a place where people will buy a tent cheap or rent a tent, whatever the case. I know that in Ville Saint-Laurent they got the permission for limited in a parking lot of the shul with the police. I understand MTC got permission for some, and I don't know whether it's just for their own members or if it's for other people also, that they got permission from the city. Over here, those that tried were unable to get permission from the city. Look at that, fantastic. René Depot, got all different sorts of things over here. Yeah, Oil pasuch rak gag. Okay, so that's that's what they're doing in Ile Saint Laurent too. It's like Avram Avinu's tent. The question is if it's windy and things like that, how much that's going to help keep everything dry. I think it's if you see that even a drop of water can ruin a Sefer Torah, involving bezoyin for the Sefer Torah and the possible mechikas Isis, mechikas Hashem, things of that sort. So it's better to avoid. Okay, so my porch minyan is starting now. So again, if there are, I will leave that question. I opened up an email address just for those sorts of questions. So if there are other questions, you can email over there, or you could call me, or whatever the case is. And if there's a need or a desire for more shiurim after Yom Tov, we should do so. In the meantime, maybe we should have Kabbalah HaTeira, B'simcha Pnimius, just one word that I mentioned by the Fabring Motzei Shabbos. Is a gewaltige word. The Rebbe said, attached up na Yemim, the beginning of Sivan, that says if you throw a stick up in the air, that it comes back to its root. So throwing up the stick in the air, the Rebbe touched up the Rabbeim, the Heben Uf, Jeden Chassid. Throwing up the stick in the air is the Rabbeim lifting us up to a higher Madrega. So therefore we have the Inyan of Shavuos. And when the Yidden show how precious it is, Matan Torah to us, and we do it with a Chayas, and we do it with Avos Yisrael and Achdas Yisrael, and with all the Hidurim we're able to do under the circumstances. So then certainly the Eivers will bring us, so we should hear the Torah Chadasha from Rabbi Yisrael, take it from Yad Mamish.
Amen.
Cool.
Thank you.